All right. Am I audible? Good evening, everybody. Today we have amongst ourselves Mr. Ashish Davisar, who is practicing at the Rajasthan High Court Jaipur bench for quite some time. Mr. Davisar is mainly practicing on the criminal side, and apart from that, he is also an animal rights activist, a known animals rights activist who has great love for animals and is very vociferous and vocal for their rights. Mr. Davisar started his practice at Amritsar courts, and after having practiced for about 2 years over there, he got summoned by Rajasthan committee. So he packed up his bags and left for Rajasthan. And there he is not just practicing well, but he has a very roaring practice over there. Apart from this, Mr. Davisar is also an avid reader and a great scholar. He has researched on several topics, written articles, got them published. And one such article, which is close to his heart, on which he has read a lot and wishes to share, is the today's topic, that is the relation of India and Nepal and debunking the myth of perpetual independence of Nepal. As the Nepalese always say, that we have always been independent, never been captured. So, without taking any further time, I request Ashish ji to share his topic with us today.
Thank you, brother. So I'll begin by saying that the recent bitterness which we have all witnessed in the relationship between India and Nepal, beginning from the release of the new political map by the Nepalese government, which practically shows within the new political map of Nepal, three areas which are currently in the possession of India. Namely, now what are those three areas? Namely, the Lipu Lake Pass, which is actually the gateway to Tibet for all the Indian pilgrims en route the Kailash Mansarovar pilgrimage. The second area is Limpiadhura and then Kalapani, all of them in the state of Uttarakhand. And this has actually been a cause of acute bewilderment for people, for these two neighbors are so inextricably connected by social, religious, and cultural affinity since time immemorial. And the bewilderment quickly turned into panic when few days back, one Indian farmer died and two other Indian farmers sustained injuries in the firing by the Nepalese security forces in the Sitamarhi district of Bihar, which borders Nepal on the north. Now, there seems to be no thaw in sight in the relations between the two countries. In the light of the Nepalese Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli accusing India 2 days back of actually attempting to topple his government in Nepal, for which, of course, he has come under heavy criticism from the doyens of his own party, the Nepalese Communist Party. Now, Nepal is a country which we must remember claims to have always remained independent and unconquered in its history. It does not celebrate any day as Independence Day, unlike India, which of course celebrates 15th August as the day of liberation from the British rule. In fact, having been to Nepal multiple times, I can vouch that it is projected in Nepal that the concept of Independence Day itself is alien to Nepal, for it was never enslaved by anyone in its history. Apart from Nepal, New Zealand also does not celebrate Independence Day, but that is because they have not been able to work out when they actually became independent. When and how New Zealand became independent is a matter of perpetual social and academic research in New Zealand. But in case of Nepal, they are very certain that they will not celebrate any day as Independence Day because they claim to have remained unconquered throughout their history. And this narrative has since then spread in Nepal. In fact, we have always been independent has actually become a global hallmark of the Nepalese identity. The moment the issue of foreign invasions in the context of historical pasts of the nation states props up, a Nepalese, we can rest assured, if he is a participant in the discourse, would readily and proudly utter, Nepal is the only country on earth which has never been conquered by anyone. Almost like a hymn which is indelibly engraved deep in our hearts. But I would state that this voluble utterance stems out of complete ignorance of the historical past of this beautiful Himalayan nation. Now, is it really true that Nepal was always unconquered and never remained part of India? The Nepalese also reject that they were at any point in their history a part of India. Is there more than what meets the eye? I also used to blindly believe and even once felt ashamed when I was actually told by a Nepalese friend of mine that unlike India, we were never slaves of anyone and thus do not celebrate Independence Day. That was the day I decided to uh, dive into the ocean of history, and I ended up discovering pearls of knowledge which outshine the theory of perpetual Nepalese independence held and propagated so dearly in Nepal. Now, I have made an attempt through my article to debunk the myth that Nepal remained unconquered in its history, which will also, as a corollary to it, debunk the myth that Nepal has never been a part of India. Now, if we have a look at the historical past of Nepal, it would show that Adi Shankaracharya himself had gone to Kathmandu Valley when he went to all four directions in the ancient India to establish four centers of learning. In fact, the regional bifurcation of India into four cardinal centers of learning, also known as peeths, resulted in establishment of four peeths by Adi Shankaracharya in four different directions of India. The peeth in the south being Rameshwaram, the one on the west being Dwarka, the one on the east is Jagannath Puri, and the one in north is Badrinath. Now, the Badrinath peeth, according to the setup given by the Adi Shankaracharya, was to have authority over entire northern India, Kashmir, Punjab, and the Panchal kingdom. Now, it is noteworthy at this juncture for me to state that Panchal kingdom extended from Arunachal Pradesh in east to Himalayas in the west, covering practically the whole of Himalayas. At the time of establishment of the Badrinath peeth, the present-day political Nepal was a part of the kingdom of Panchal. Hence, even today, Nepal is considered to be under the northern peeth of Badrinath, even though it is a sovereign, and it is a fact which even the Nepalese people do not deny. In fact, if we delve further into the history of Nepal, we can easily gather that the coronation mantra of the king of Nepal at the time of his coronation was, and I quote, Bharat Khande, Bharat Varshe, Himavate, Nepal Rajye, which practically means Bharat Khand is the continent, Bharat Varsh the country, Himavat the entire region of Himalayas having many kingdoms within it, and Nepal being the state. Even today, if we go to many temples in Nepal, we can easily find this mantra being chanted in temples like Muktinath and also in Pashupatinath. In fact, until the conquest of Kathmandu in the year 1768 by Prithvi Narayan Shah, the Gorkha king, and at that time Kathmandu was also called Kantipur. Till that time, only the Kathmandu Valley was referred to as Nepal or the Nepal Mandal. The Kathmandu Valley consisted of the present-day Kathmandu, Lalitpur, and Bhaktapur districts of Nepal. There is no historical evidence of anyone in Kathmandu Valley of even remotely ever suggesting it to be culturally, socially, much less politically distinct and separate from India. In fact, it was a small valley consisting of only a few districts with its northern boundary to the north of the present-day northern boundary of Nepal on the Tibet border. King Yalambar had represented the kingdom of Kirat, which was composed of the most parts of the present-day northern Nepal in the Mahabharata battle, where he was eventually slayed by Lord Krishna. Now, the question which comes on my mind is, what was he doing in the Mahabharata battle if he was not the king of a kingdom in Bharat, in India? Because the invitees in the Mahabharata battle were only the kings of the kingdoms within India and not outside it. If we see the history of Nepal after the Mahabharata battle, we will see that the Kirats ruled in some parts of present-day northern Nepal until they were defeated by the Soma kings in the 3rd century AD. After the Somas came into power, they were defeated by the Lichavas, who ruled in the present-day Nepal and Bihar from 3rd century AD to the 6th century AD. The boundary of Nepal was not what it is today. It was restricted only and only to the Kathmandu Valley. We fast forward to the 12th century AD. The Lichavis were defeated by the Malas, who then conquered parts of the present-day Nepal. The kingdom of Nepal during the inception of the Mala rule in 12th AD was just 1/4 of the present-day Nepal, a very small and a rather tiny kingdom in the north of Bihar spread over Kathmandu Valley. Perpetual Nepalese independence, which is touted as the hallmark of Nepal, is still nowhere in sight. A few historical events which took place during the 14th century would further pierce the illusion of Nepalese independence and its separation from India. In the 14th century, King Yakshamala of Nepal had conquered parts of present-day northern Bihar and West Bengal in India, and also the Gorkha district in Nepal, which were earlier parts of various other kingdoms within India. After having so conquered all these places, Yakshamala then went on to divide his kingdom between his 6 children, Rayamala, Ratnamala, Ranamala, Arimala, and Purnamala, and a daughter Dharmavati. Rayamala gets the kingdom of Bhaktapur, Ratnamala gets the kingdom of Kathmandu, Ranamala is given the kingdom of Banepa, whereas the only daughter Dharmavati gets the kingdom of Patan. In the year 1767 thereafter, the Battle of Kirtipur was fought between Prithvi Narayan Shah, an ambitious Gorkha ruler, and the Newars at Kirtipur, which was one of the principal towns in the Kathmandu Valley. Now, Newars are the original inhabitants, have always been considered to be the original inhabitants of the Kathmandu Valley. The conquest of Kathmandu Valley by Prithvi Narayan Shah, who is touted as the father of Nepal, in the year 1768, paints a rather gruesome picture. The invading Gorkha army led by Prithvi Narayan Shah was trounced during the first assault which it had launched on the Kathmandu Valley in the year 1757. Thereafter, it again launched another assault on the Kathmandu Valley in the year 1764 under the command of Prithvi Narayan Shah's brother Suruparatna. The people of Kirtipur, the present-day Kathmandu, had succeeded in making the Gorkhas retreat by raining stones on them from the town walls. In the battle which ensued, Surpratap, who was leading the battle for the Gorkhas, was struck by an arrow in the eye and blinded. Sensing that he has no hope of capturing Kirtipur, the present-day Kathmandu, by force, Prithvi Narayan Shah used a blockade in an effort to starve the population of Kathmandu Valley into an absolute submission. Kirtipur was then deprived of its water supply by Prithvi Narayan Shah for 6 months in the year 1765. And when the valley finally fell to Prithvi Narayan Shah, the noses of all its citizens above 12 years of age were chopped off. Jayaprakash Mala, the losing king of Kirtipur, went to Lalitpur to seek asylum from Tej Narsimha Malla, who had ruled Lalitpur. Prithvi Narayan Shah then went on to attack and he captured Lalitpur, thereby forcing Jayaprakash Mala along with Tej Narsimha Malla to run to Bhaktapur to seek asylum from Ranajit Malla. And when Prithvi Narayan Shah attacked Bhaktapur, Ranajit Malla also surrendered. Now later on, after all these areas fell to Prithvi Narayan Shah, Ranajit Malla was sent to Kashi, Varanasi to spend the rest of his life. Jayaprakash Malla was sent to Pashupatinath and Tej Narsimha Malla was kept in a lifetime detention. Now, as a result of the annexation of these kingdoms by Prithvi Narayan Shah, considered to be the father of Nepal, a larger kingdom came into existence and was called Nepal, with Kathmandu as its capital in the year 1768. However, Prithvi Narayan Shah does not stop here after capturing the kingdoms which had been divided by Yakshamala between his children. He then attacked and conquered parts of Garhwal, Kumaon kingdoms of present-day Uttarakhand, and he practically conquered the entire state of Uttarakhand and also the entire state of Sikkim, which further expanded the territory of Nepal and thus the boundary of Nepal, which emerged after the conquest of these Indian states as a kingdom was Satluj River in the west and Teesta River in the east. Now, very similar to the fate of wars between other kingdoms of India, wherein the victorious king would merge the kingdom of losing king into his own kingdom. After overthrowing or killing the losing king, Prithvi Narayan Shah also walked on the same trajectory. And he had famously said that Nepal is the real Bharatvarsh, not because he wanted to be separate from India, but because the Mughals could never conquer the high Himalayan regions of India. Even in the present state of Himachal Pradesh, the Mughals could never conquer beyond the lower hills of Kangra. And practically, they could never reach the mighty Himadri range, the upper Himalayas. And it would thus be preposterous on the part of anyone to even suggest that those parts of the present day Himachal Pradesh, which remained independent of Mughal, were not within India for the simple reason that they remained independent. Now, if you see the history of Nepal after the conquest of these areas, after capturing Sikkim and Uttarakhand, the Nepalese king began to expand his empire in the British-controlled Awadh province in the south. The British expansion was already met with very fierce resistance in India by the Marathas and in Punjab by Ranjit Singh. These expansionist plans of the Nepalese king led to a war between him and the East India Company, famously known as the Anglo-Nepalese War, fought in the year 1814. The Nepalese king lost the war, albeit the British had to suffer heavy losses. After the culmination of war, the Treaty of Sigauli was executed between King of Nepal and British in the city of Sigauli in Nepal. Now, under this treaty, the Nepalese king had to cede to the British most of the territories which he had been able to capture. As a result of the execution of this treaty, he lost the entire state of Sikkim, including Darjeeling, the territories of Kumaon and Garhwal in Uttarakhand, and also the western Terai. Thereafter, the Mechi River became the new eastern border and the Mahakali River the western boundary of the Kingdom of Nepal. Coming to the relationship between the Nepalese king and the British post the execution of the Sigauli Treaty in the year 1815, the Nepalese king had supported the British in suppressing the revolt by Indians against the British in the year 1857. In fact, the Nepalese were the only ethnic group in India which had actually supported the British in suppressing the mutiny in the year 1857. Now, in 1860, some regions of Terai to the north of present-day Bihar were returned by British to the Nepalese king in reward for his help in suppressing the rebellion of 1857 in India against the British. Now, hence, the Kingdom of Nepal acquired its present-day political boundary in the year 1860 only, when the fertile Terai region, which is actually called Mini India in Nepal, to the north of Bihar, was given as a reward by the British to the King of Nepal. In pith and substance, Nepal had become a protectorate of British after the Sigauli Treaty of 1815. And anybody who has any doubt over whether Nepal was a protectorate of British or not must read clauses 5, 6, and 7 of the Treaty of Sigauli, which debunk the myth of Nepal having remained independent from the British. And I would just briefly read 2 clauses of the Sigauli Treaty. Clause 6 of the treaty says that the King of Nepal engages never to molest or disturb the King of Sikkim in the possession of his territories. If any difference shall arise between Nepal and Sikkim, it shall be referred to the arbitration of the East India Company. Whereas the following clause number 7 of the treaty says, the King of Nepal hereby engages never to take or retain in his service any British subject, nor the subject of any European or American state without the consent of the British government. And according to clause number 8, accredited ministers from Nepal and Britain were to remain stationed at the court of the other in order to secure and improve the relationship of amity and peace. Now, the maps of India, the political maps of India, which had been drawn by the British after 1816 do not show Nepal within India, as British Crown and Nepal and the Nepalese Crown had executed the Sigauli Treaty, under which the Nepalese monarch was reduced to a protectorate of British. Hence, for this reason, the British were never bothered with Nepal after 1816 when the Sigauli Treaty was executed. Yes, yes, sir.
No, there was just an interruption. No question as of now, sir. Questions would be at the end of it. You please continue.
Yes, thank you. All right. And whereas the maps drawn by the British, the political maps of India drawn by the British prior to the year 1816 do show and do rather unambiguously show Nepal as a part of India. The map, all the political maps of India drawn by the British after the year 1816 do not show it as a part of India, for the simple reason that the British Crown had executed a separate treaty with the Nepalese Crown. Now we all know that when the British divided India between India and Pakistan, they drew up the Red Cliff Line to divide only those parts of India which were directly colonized by them. The remaining were the kingdoms of the princely states of the independent kings, and there were in all 565 princely states in India at the time of independence. All these 565 princely states were declared as independent countries by the British when they left India, and it was left to the crown of these kingdoms to merge either in India or Pakistan or remain independent. Now, it was only due to the efforts of Sardar Patel that 552 princely states had agreed to merge in India, and only 13 chose to go to Pakistan. Had it not been for the efforts of Sardar Patel, India would have been the most mouth-eaten country, with over 550 kingdoms like Nepal becoming nation states. Resultantly, not only they would have got a separate national map, but many of them may also have in due course of time become nation states, just like Nepal, hostile to India, having claimed to remain aloof from the British colonization, and with a political narrative which rejected any past geographical or cultural assimilation in India. Now let us see what happened to Nepal as a protectorate after the execution of the Sigauli Treaty. After the Sigauli Treaty that was executed in 1815 between the two kings, under which Nepal became a protectorate of British, the king of Nepal became and remained the stooge of the British. The Sigauli Treaty further culminated in the Nepal-Britain Friendship Treaty of 1923, under which the Nepalese monarch was rewarded for displaying true friendship towards the British. The Treaty of 1923 between Nepal and Britain opens up by saying, and I quote, "Whereas peace and friendship have now existed between the British government and the government of Nepal since the signing of the Treaty of Sigauli on the 2nd day of December 1815, the government of Nepal has ever displayed its true friendship for the British government," unquote. Now, there is no doubt in my mind that the expression true friendship used in the treaty, in the opening paragraph of the treaty, is nothing but a euphemism for abject servility in the context in which it has been used in the 1923 treaty. It was only due to this treaty that Nepal had emerged on the world map as an independent and sovereign nation state in the year 1923, 24 years before India attained its independence. But the seed of separation of it from India was sown in the year 1815. The Nepalese king lost the war to British in the year 1815, and he had to part with a large chunk of his territory. He had to part with Sikkim, he had to part with the entire state of Uttarakhand, he had to part with Darjeeling. He supported the British in crushing the revolt by the Indians against the British in 1857, and he remained the stooge of the British till 1923. Jang Bahadur Rana became the Prime Minister of Nepal on September 15, 1846, after killing after assassinating the incumbent prime minister and members of his palace court, and immediately after his taking over, he went to meet George Ramsay, the British resident at the British residency appointed under the Sigauli Treaty. He informed the British resident about the massacre and also convinced him that the government in Nepal will be a great friend of the English. Now, how big a stooge he was of the British can be gauged from the fact that he had kept a portrait of the Queen Victoria in the sitting room of his palace and said, and I quote, "Here is the Queen of England, and she has not got a more loyal subject than I am. The British government tells us that it has no desire to interfere with our internal affairs. We attribute that independence solely to our peculiar policy. You are like a lion, we are like a cat. The cat will scratch if it is driven into a corner, but the lion will soon kill the cat." Unquote. The British resident, another British resident, the following British resident, E.L. Durant, had written letters in the year 1889 stating, and I quote, "The fact of the supremacy of the British government, the fact of the absolute dependence of Nepal upon the generosity and liberality of the government of India, and the fact that no outside claim for interference with our undoubted protectorate could be tolerated in regard to any state on this side of the Himalayas." Unquote. Another British diplomat, Lee Warner, had remarked in respect of Nepal, and I quote, "I have never regarded Nepal as independent except in certain attributes of sovereignty. Its internal sovereignty is more complete than that of any other protected state of India, but it has no real international life. It is therefore, in my opinion, a glorified member of the British protectorate." Unquote. Another word on the British perception of the Nepalese sovereignty came from the Viceroy Lord Curzon. In the year 1903, he had written a letter to the Secretary of State in which he writes, and I quote, "It approximates more closely to our connection with Bhutan than with any other native state. Nepal should be regarded as falling under our exclusive political influence and control." Unquote. Now the question is, was Nepal really independent during British rule in India as projected by the government of Nepal and also by the citizens of Nepal? Perhaps yes, as the British did not directly administer Nepal after the execution of the Sigauli Treaty with it in the year 1815. But at what cost? From the execution of Sigauli Treaty in the year 1815 to the Nepal-Britain Friendship Treaty in the year 1923, whereby and whereunder Nepal emerged on the world map as a separate nation state after being carved out of India. The Kingdom of Nepal had remained a protectorate of Britain by adopting servility as a state policy, which in my considered opinion is even worse than being a direct slave. The sovereignty of Nepal during the British rule in India, if any, was only and only marginal internal sovereignty, and that too was determined by the degree of relationship it had which the kingdom in Kathmandu had enjoyed with British. In the British India, the British expansionist plans were being fiercely resisted, and the people in India had fought against the British. They bombed the government offices and even killed the British officers in the Battle of Independence. But this was simply not replicated in the Kingdom of Nepal, which had embraced servility as state policy and had even helped the British to suppress the revolt by their own countrymen in the year 1857. Now, after the British, now what is the nature of relationship which India and Nepal enjoyed after the departure of British from India? After the British left India, it is said that King Tribhuvan of Nepal had offered to the then Prime Minister of India, Jawaharlal Nehru, to merge Nepal in India like all other kingdoms of India. Albeit no official document to this end has been traced till date, and although there is no concrete documentary evidence of it till date, but it is a word of mouth. It is also said that the then Nepalese Prime Minister Matrika Prasad Koirala had also suggested to Prime Minister Nehru to merge Nepal in India, for which, of course, there is again no documentary evidence. And Sardar Patel had also suggested to Prime Minister Nehru to merge Nepal into the Indian Union, but it is said that Prime Minister Nehru had rejected the idea of Nepalese merger in India, saying that it would send a message to the world that soon after attaining independence, India has adopted expansionist policies. In fact, as recently as the year 2008, the Nepal Communist Party, a senior leader of Nepal Communist Party, Dr. Baburam Bhattarai, who then went on to become the Prime Minister of Nepal in the year 2011 and remained as such till 2013, had publicly expressed his feeling at a program organized by young industrialists on 11th May 2008 that Nepal-India open border should either be regulated or the two countries should be merged. He had said, and I quote, Nepal's development is not possible with an open border with India. Hence, either it must be managed or let it be merged in India. After India attained independence, Nepal had slowly made a transition from being a monarchy to a constitutional monarchy. In the year 1959, a constitution was finally approved for the Kingdom of Nepal, which of course by then had become a sovereign nation state. And under this constitution, the general elections for a national assembly were held for the first time in Nepal. The Nepalese Congress won an overwhelming victory and was entrusted with the formation of Nepal's first popular government. However, due to a friction in the relationship between the government and King Mahendra, the monarch, the king had dismissed the Nepalese Congress government in December 1960 and imprisoned most of the party's leaders. The Constitution of 1915 was then abolished in the year 1962, and a new constitution was promulgated that established the Crown of Nepal as the real source of authority. Now, it is famously said in Nepal that people of Nepal hated monarchy, yet they loved the king of Nepal. And there was a constant movement after 1962 in Nepal to make Nepal a democratic republic. And it was as a result of this long-drawn battle that on May 28, 2008, the newly elected Constituent Assembly had declared Nepal a federal democratic republic, abolishing the 240-year-old monarchy, which was responsible not only for keeping people of Nepal in abject misery, but also disconnected them from the rest of the world. And India had played the most instrumental role in transition of Nepal from a monarchy to a democratic republic. But it seems now that this transition of Nepal to a democratic republic has turned out to be a bane for the Indo-Nepal relationship. The Communist Party of Nepal, which is presently ruling Nepal, is on the path of an anti-India tirade, practically due to its ideological affinity with China, which is also ruled by communists only. Now, to conclude the nature of relationship between India and Nepal, my take on it is that Nepal, having remained independent, much less perpetually independent, is a myth which explodes at the slightest touch. It is like a thin balloon of air which explodes at the slightest touch. And I would further suggest that it was wrong on the part of India to have rejected the offer of Nepalese merger in India, regardless of whether the offer of merger had come from the King of Nepal or it had come from the Prime Minister of Nepal. It cannot be denied that Nepal was an integral part of the country till 1815, which became a separate nation state only 24 years prior to Indian independence from the British, due to the British policy of divide and rule. And because of the cultural and socio-religious setup of Nepal, which is so homogeneous with India, it should have been merged in the Indian Union, regardless of whether the offer came or not. But because it was not merged in the Indian Union, therefore, despite there being an undeniable and inextricable connection of Nepal with India steeped deep in its history, the narrative of being unconquered and separate from India has been implanted and systematically nurtured in Nepal, which has now penetrated and cemented to the extent that not only most Nepalese people today reject any past geographical, political, or cultural assimilation in India, but they question the very existence of India prior to the departure of British from India in the year 1947. With that, I rest my views on the article that I have written, and I would now request all of the members to chip in with their views, and I'm open to any questions coming from any quarter.
Thank you, Ashish ji. That was quite a lot of knowledge about the India and Nepal, something we did not know. Probably we had never read it also, and gains a lot of importance in today's area, today's date when there's a lot of confrontation between the countries. So it's very surprising. I'll now ask Padam to take over. Karan ji also had a question to ask. Karan, where are you? Please unmute. Just a second. I'm sorry. Yes, you can unmute yourself.
You're not audible.
Am I audible, Mr. Davesar?
Yes, yes.
Mr. Davesar, I wanted to know that apart from the communist background of both the nations, Nepal as well as China, is there a policy of China of providing freebies to Nepal also responsible for the present alignment with or drifting towards China of Nepal? Because I've read of late that there is a policy that China has endorsed a view that you have to teach Mandarin in all the schools in Nepal, and if it is so taught, the Chinese would be bearing all the expenses of the teachers and other things. And then in the light of this, that they've recently passed a resolution that they would not be using Hindi in their parliament and in their official decors. Something with regard to that, if you can say.
That is right. And firstly, pertaining to the mandatory teaching of Mandarin in the Nepalese schools, I had also read this news item on many news portals. So I actually inquired it from my friends in Nepal, and they told me that no such policy has been adopted in Nepal till date. And it is a proposal by the Chinese government, but it has not been accepted by the Nepalese government till date. But there is a proposal, and we will not be surprised, at least I will not be surprised if the proposal is accepted by the Nepalese government very soon. Now, coming to the alignment of Nepal with China, it is undeniable that over the past few years, particularly after Nepal became a federal democratic republic, that China has been attempting to woo Nepal by hook and crook. And China, in fact, has woven a very good network of roads in northern parts of Nepal, connecting it to the inner land of Nepal. And China has also been giving scholarships to Nepalese students in order to woo them to China. And I think it is as a result of all these cumulative factors that Nepal is slowly but surely tilting towards China and going away from the realm of India. And I think that there is some shortcoming on the part of the Indian government too, because the Indian government should be going, because now all kinds of political theories are being flouted in Nepal, that India has been attempting to destabilize the Nepalese government. And I believe that there is some shortcoming on the part of the Indian government to reach out to the people of Nepal, or to reach out to the political mainstream of Nepal and reassure them that, look, we have not been doing that. This is a vicious propaganda which is being spread in Nepal by Prime Minister Oli in order to cling on to power, because he has been facing revolt within his party on a whole lot of issues. Inflation has been going up in Nepal manifold. He has not been able to control COVID-19, and he has not been able to produce results on many other in many other fields also. And there have been constant demands in Nepal to for the resignation of Prime Minister Oli. And in order to divert the attention from all those demands, I believe he is spewing venom against India to take the attention away from his own failures. But India should go ahead and it should reach out to the people of Nepal that look, we have no animosity against you. We have always been supporting you in any manner, and we are the ones who brought democracy to Nepal, and we do not intend to topple your government. It is for you to decide whether your government shall exist or whether it shall go.
Ashish ji, my question would be, generally what we see is that in the past, the dependence of the Nepal on India is quite a lot. Like when there was a rift earlier about a year or two ago, a lot of petroleum supplies, gas supplies had stopped to Nepal, which is all from India. And everything had come to a standstill over there. And seeing the fact that geographical position is also such that the assistance from India is more easily available than China, what do you see in future that in case there's a conflict and Nepal has to choose, maybe, just a hypothetical question, won't it be more feasible to have assistance from India rather than China? Because geographically it will be very difficult to get things, howsoever many roads they may have built, but China is still inaccessible from Nepal than from India.
I do totally agree with you. In fact, on the northern boundary which Nepal shares with China, it is a totally inaccessible terrain, and there is no way that the supply line can ever be guaranteed from that terrain to the mainland Nepal, and therefore it is only from India that the supplies can be accessed, that the supplies can be taken to Nepal. Coming to the blockade, we must also remember that there is a Madheshi movement going on in Nepal, and Madheshis are inhabitants of the Terai region of Nepal, which is the southernmost part of Nepal, which was given by the British as a gift to the Nepalese king for the support that he had given to the British in suppressing the mutiny of 1857. And this is a very fertile region of Nepal. In fact, it is the only fertile region of Nepal. The middle Nepal, the middle Nepal is not fertile, and what to talk of the northern Nepal, which is nothing but the Himadri range of the Himalayas. So it is the Terai region of Nepal, which is inhabited by the Madheshis, which is the only fertile region in Nepal, and Madheshis have been voicing their concerns over the new constitution which has been adopted in Nepal, and for the reason that they say that they have not been given adequate representation in the new constitution, that their concerns have not been addressed. And Madheshis are basically people who have many of their family members in India, particularly in the states of UP and Bihar, and also elsewhere in India. And they say that their concerns have not been met, and they have always been discriminated in Nepal, and they wanted some provisions in the new constitution to reassure them that their rights would in no manner be trampled upon by the new government, unlike what had been happening in the past in Nepal, where all the resources were being given to the people in the upper regions of Nepal, thereby totally ignoring the Madheshis. So they wanted a reassurance from Nepal, but there is a movement going on there even till date to bring some provisions in the Nepalese constitution which would pacify the Madheshis. And because the Madheshi movement had become rather violent in the year 2013, therefore, as a result of that, all the trucks and other vehicles which were to ferry the supply to Nepal were stranded on the Indian side, and India had not mounted a blockade of Nepal. The blockade of Nepal,
was from the Nepal side. It was from the Nepal side.
Was due to the fear of being was due to the fear of being caught in the violent movement which had been brewing up on the Nepalese side. So as a result of that, the entire supply chain had gathered on the Indian side. But then also there are political parties in Nepal, and we must remember that there is a very strong anti-India propaganda machinery in Nepal, which has been spreading all kinds of propaganda against the Indian government, accusing it of uh, uh, blocking the entire supply chain to Nepal during the Madheshi movement. But the reality is that India had not mounted the blockade of Nepal.
There's a question on the Facebook by Mr. Jindal. He says whether there should be the boundary restrictions between the two countries or not.
Well, again, this is so far as the question of boundary restrictions are concerned, I think India must adopt the policy of quid pro quo. There is a friendship treaty executed between India and Nepal in the year 1950, because by then India had actually rejected the offer of Nepalese merger in India, and therefore a friendship treaty came to be executed in the year 1950. Now, under this treaty, the border between both the countries has to be an open border to facilitate the movement of people between both the countries, because we must remember that there are cross-border people on both sides of the border. So I personally do not think that there should be a clause that India should make any attempt to fence the border from its side, because we still have the support of people of Nepal, even though the government in Nepal has become hostile to India for the simple reason that it has an ideological affinity with China. But the people of Nepal are still not hostile to India, and many of them actually blame India for the bitterness in the India-Nepal relationship on the by saying that India should never have allowed Nepal to emerge as an independent nation. When it had offered to merge in India, it should have accepted the offer and merged it in the Indian Union. So I, for one, do not believe that India should fence the border unilaterally.
Sarthak has a question. Sarthak, please go on.
Can you hear me, sir?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah, I can hear you, sir.
Yes. Sir, I'll disagree with you a little as to why we should fence the border. This is primarily because a lot of terrorist activities are coming in from Nepal. Your IC-814 happened from Nepalese soil. Correct. Then Siddhi Bappa, as you might remember, the Simi terrorist was indeed captured in Nepal. Correct. So a lot of terrorists use the Nepal route to come into India. They enter Nepal easily and then use the Nepal route to come into India because the border restrictions are not there. So if this is taken into account, don't you think it makes
sense?
I
think Yaqub Menon was also arrested from Nepal.
Yaqub Menon was also arrested from Nepal. So a lot of terrorists keep coming in from Nepal because of the open border policy. So shouldn't indeed we close the border because of what India has suffered in the past few years?
Well, the open border policy does not mean that anybody from India can just walk into Nepal without being questioned or without being screened or vice versa. It simply mandates that no Indian requires a passport to enter Nepal and vice versa. And even today, if you go to Nepal from the Indian border whether it is in UP, because Nepal shares a border with the Indian states of Uttarakhand, UP and Bihar, it does not mean that I can just walk in. I have to produce I have to produce some identity cards, some identity proof, which would prove that I am a citizen of India. They do question you at the border, and then only once they're convinced that you are actually a citizen of India, they let you in. And similar is the case of the Nepalese people entering India. And therefore, so far as the question of the terrorists sneaking in on account of the open border policy, the answer would be to install an effective security mechanism at the border to ensure that nobody is able to sneak in by taking advantage of the open border policy.
Okay. That's a fair answer, sir.
There's a question from Mr. Jindal. He says, then what is the policy which the Indian government should adopt today, seeing the today's scenario?
Well, the first thing I believe the Indian government should do is to reach out to the people of Nepal and reassure them that Nepal has now become a democratic republic, and it is the master of its own destiny. It has to decide who is going to lead Nepal, and India has no intention of ever interfering in Nepal in any manner. It is India which was, of course, instrumental in bringing democracy to Nepal, and this was the long-pending demand of the people of Nepal. But after having brought the democratic traditions to this Himalayan kingdom, I believe that India did somewhere fail in reassuring the people of Nepal, and that India does not have any intention, because presently there is a due to the border due to the long border which Nepal shares with China, there is a very vicious anti-India propaganda machinery which has come about in Nepal. And I say that on the basis of my personal experience, having been to Nepal multiple times, that the Nepalese and this anti-India machinery has been able to make inroads into every walk of life in Nepal, be it media, be it academic, in just every walk of life. You just name it, and you will find an anti-India machinery in Nepal, which would practically accuse India of anything, be it the blockade that happened as a result of the violent Madheshi movement, or the instability in the government in Nepal, or for anything in Nepal. And I think India should just reach out to the people of Nepal and tell them that we do not have any intention to interfere, to trample upon your sovereignty.
Any other questions from anyone? Please. There was a question on the Facebook, but I don't think so. This is why doesn't Nepal accept rupees 500 and 2,000 notes, even though so many Nepali people are. I think we all know the answer quite a lot to it. That's demonetization, and not probably due to these issues. That's probably due to demonetization. Am I right? So that's probably
that has to do with the black money.
Demonetization. That was actually demonetization, and demonetization, they had a lot of issues. This is a lot of currency was left over here, which could not be exchanged. So that is why probably they have stopped accepting 500 and 2,000. 100 rupee notes are still accepted over there.
Correct.
But not the new 5,000, 500 or 2,000 rupee note.
No, they are not being accepted. Padamji, over to you.
So today we had the privilege to hear Mr. Ashish about the views of Nepalese nation and Indian relations with the Nepal. As a child, we have heard of Himalayan nation Nepal. It's also was called a Hindu nation. We have heard religiously it is a very sacred place, seat of Pashupatinath. And we often have heard of the Gurkha warriors, the mountaineers of Nepal, and the casinos there. So, but today we have heard another perspective. Mr. Ashish has explained from 1814 when this Nepalese war happened, and then 1815 when they sided with the British, and there was a treaty amongst them, and till 1923 when it became a nation state. Mr. Ashish also detailed out how the border disputes existed and how are they being solved, trying to be solved. What is the role of India in converting a monarchy to constitutional monarchy and then to a democratic republic, the role of king there. So many minute details of Nepalese history we must know. I think we should know, being a neighbor country, and because of the situation nowadays, we are hearing in news and reading in newspapers. So we must be aware of the history so that we could confront someone if a thing is said or discussed. I myself belong from Bihar, and have relatives in Uttar Pradesh also. And I know a bit that the border India-Nepal shares in these states, there's called a roti beti ka rishta. So people often get married, their daughters in Nepal and Nepalese people in India, and people go to work in Nepalese territory, and Nepalese people come into Indian territory for work. So that is why it's called roti beti ka rishta. And the people of Nepal, though I think they are simple people, but they are being misled, or there are mischievous elements in Nepal. So Mr. Ashish has very beautifully explained the history and the disputes about the in their internal disputes also, about the political disputes also, and the role of the king there, who was the supreme. So I take this opportunity to thank Mr. Ashish for sharing this valuable topic, though not very important from legal perspective, but very important from national perspective. And we as the lawyers, responsible citizens of India, should know this history, which was never told to us. I'm very grateful on the behalf of all the organizers to Mr. Ashish and Mr. Asim, who introduced him to us. And I once again pay my regards to everybody for listening to us, for joining us on Facebook and Zoom. I hand over to Vishal so that he can close.
Asim, you would like to add in something?
I'd like to thank everybody for giving us an opportunity, especially Ashish ji, and Ashish ji for sharing such a beautiful topic with such in-depth, of which we never knew, Sigoli Treaty and all. We just heard these things, we never knew what they really were. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ashish ji, and we